So, hello everybody. I am Will Shook with 5S Technologies, and I am tickled to serve as your host today. Welcome to why the DoD is all in on Zero Trust. It's our second episode of our 2024 Thought Leadership Series on cybersecurity. So thank you for joining us. We are proud to share that 5S Technologies is now become part of Ark Technology Consultants. That is going to give us a broader and deeper set of services, quite honestly, to bring to our new customer base up and down the Eastern U.S. So those of you that's first knowledge of, we look forward to sharing more of it with you. A couple housekeeping items. The Teams meeting has been set. With mics off, but Q&A open. So feel free to post questions that you have. If they fit with the flow of the topic at the time, we'll see if we can address it at that time. Otherwise, we will address the questions at the tail end of the session. So with that said, away we go. So why this topic, right? And it really can be answered by answering a few underlying topics, right? Who's at the top of the hacker world's juiciest target list, right? Yeah, that's a new technical term there. But, what organization in the world gets more hacking attempts than any other, right? Who is the Miss Universe of hacking targets? Number two, whom do you think the most powerful hacking organizations in the world? Certainly, Turla, Fancy Bear, other Eastern European groups. But how about the nation states, right? They have the most resources? China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And who do you think they want to breach? Is it Luxembourg, Malta, Burundi? Of course not, right? It's go home, it's go big or go home for those folks, right? It's the United States Department of Defense, because the rewards are immense. The military secrets, the warfare IP, military doctrine, their threat surface is huge. And particularly when you consider their supply chain, right? Big companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, etc. So, here's the strategic mandate. If you're the DoD, right, you need to be ahead of your enemy. You need to be ahead of even zero-day threats. And you need strategies and controls that make this happen. It's really a mindset, right, that makes this happen. And zero trust is a big part of this strategic mandate for the US DoD to keep themselves safe. So ultimately, right, we chose this topic, and by talking with a bunch of customers as well, because they are the biggest target and arguably with the most to win or to lose. So there's a lot to learn from someone there's a lot to learn from someone that's climbing the highest mountain, or somebody that wins the NCAA tournament. And for those of you in the triangle with two teams from NC State that have made it to the Final Four, you learn a lot from people that are pushing the performance edge. And the DoD, with their scope, with their rewards that people can gain if they hack them, there's a lot we can learn from them. Doesn't mean we do everything like them, but and make no mistake, right, about whether these lessons apply to you, to your organization, whether you're 40 or 400 or 4,000, because you don't have to be 4 million employees to be hit with the new attack vectors, right? The ones that niftily dodge typical defenses. So think about it with the U.S. Army analogy, right? If you're patrolling around in Syria, one of our places we're active these days, and you got to go on patrol, are you just going to grab that standard old Humvee? Or maybe would you want to be in the up-armored Humvee, right? Which one's safer? So in the parlance of cybersecurity, do you want to be the CSO that didn't up-armor their corporate Humvee? So hopefully there's some lessons here about how to up-armor your own corporate Humvee. So let's press on here and kind of bring this all back to the thesis, right? Why did the DoD all go go all in, excuse me, on zero trust. So let's go to the source. So I was recently at Zero Trust World, a great conference, by the way. And I'm there and I'm looking at my phone and I'm in line waiting to get a ticket for one of the hacking labs. And those of you that know me, yes, I was going to a hacking lab. And I look up and the guy in front of me and two other folks are from the US Air Force. It says so on their badge. My dad was career Air Force. He was a fighter pilot, in fact. So I'm interested in that. I start talking to him. We get talking about why they're here at this conference. And we end up having lunch together. We went and had drinks together. I'll let you guess where that picture is from. And, but nonetheless, these fine gentlemen, that's the gentleman on the left is from Lackland Air Force Base. The other gentleman is from, it's a base in Georgia, Eisenhower, Georgia. And the other was a Pentagon. That's me, that ugly mug in front, that's Will Shook. So, but when you ask them, why have you invested so much in zero trust, right? It was real simple. The model is right. Assume you've been breached, right? And ultimately that's deny everything by default. And this is amping up Ronald Reagan's Cold War strategy. Instead of trust but verify, for those of you that remember it, it's verify then trust. And before every move, before every action, verify again and again and again. And it's a transition from implicit trust. It's a policy, it's a control, it's a mindset. And there's no panacea in cybersecurity, but I will tell you, zero trust is a giant leg up. So I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter. And excuse me. And he's a talented network and security engineer, Sam Sundell. He knows zero trust. Sam has been instrumental in making over 200 organizations like yours winners in the zero trust journey. He has 200 plus zero trust implementations under his belt. So he's a solutions engineer for ThreatLocker. That's the ThreatLocker logo on his t-shirt right there, all bold and proud. And I am going to turn it over to you and look forward to your content. Your mic.
There we go. Sorry about that. So my name is Sam Sundell. I'm a solutions engineer here at ThreatLocker. I've been with ThreatLocker for about 3 years now, but I've been in the IT industry, cybersecurity space for a little over 20. So yeah, our topic today, we're kind of talking about why the DoD is all in on zero trust and how we can stop ransomware and attacks with a zero trust approach to application control. So yeah, to get into it here, kind of moving on to kind of some of the history here. So back in 2021, the White House released an executive order around improving cybersecurity, and they wanted to move the federal government to adopt the best practices around cybersecurity, and that was a zero trust architecture, right? And so then, 2022, the DoD releases its roadmap, how it's gone all in on zero trust and how it's going to implement that. More recently, we have the NSA releasing its guidance on how it's moved to a zero trust architecture. And this isn't just the US, right? This is around the world, right? Zero trust is the accepted best practice around cybersecurity. So here we've kind of got the DoD's kind of framework, and we can really see that it's multifaceted, right? And one thing I wanted to point out here on the left here is zero trust cultural adoption, right? So it's really kind of a mindset, right? You're changing the thought of, well, I'm gonna allow my users to kind of do whatever they want to do. Maybe I've removed local admin, so it's kind of limited, but really they just kind of get to do what they want to do, and we have tools in place that will hopefully detect and respond and stop any incidents before they get too bad, right? So it's going away from that mindset to a least privilege mindset, right? To one where the ID is blocked first, to only allow what's needed, right? And zero trust is really a framework, right? There's no one solution that's going to give you zero trust in your environment, right? It's multifaceted. It's around the devices, the users, your networks, the application, your data, right? There's many facets to zero trust. So there's, like I said, there's no one tool. ThreatLocker is not going to make you 100% zero trust everywhere. What we have focused on is on the endpoint, right? And that's really where we see a lot of the attacks happening, right? With the users, right? They're kind of the weak spot, right? And that's true in any organization, right? Humans are the weakness, and so we've kind of focused on the endpoint and implementing that idea of zero trust around the endpoint. So why zero trust, right? Why is that the answer? And part of it's because attacks are changing. 20 years ago when I first started in IT, attacks were very basic, right? It was kind of someone that was smart that kind of wanted to see what they could do, right? They weren't necessarily that malicious all the time. Some of it was just kind of people being curious, hey, look what I found, look what I can do. Then it kind of changed as it got into an industry, as it became lucrative, right? Last year, there was over $1.1 billion in ransom payments paid. And that's just what we know about, right? And so it's really changed into a big business, right? So you don't maybe necessarily have nation states after your business, but you certainly have sophisticated organizations that want to make money. And there's some big headlines. You get people like MGM who were hit in 2023. It cost them over $110 million. They were down for 10 days and they didn't pay the ransom. So if anyone's gone through a ransomware attack and had to recover, even if you have the infrastructure in place, you have the backups, it's not an easy task, right? It's a lot of work. Caesars was also hit, in that same month, but they paid the ransom. It cost them around 30 million, right? So whether you don't pay the ransom or you do, it's going to cost money. And they're hitting all sectors, right? Healthcare sector is getting targeted. There was Arden Health Services, who's a very large healthcare service provider. They were hit in 2023 as well. Had to shut down emergency rooms. There were over 130 hospitals that were impacted last year. So I mean, this is really industry wide, and it's really motivated by these organizations that want to make money. And so the tools that we've used in the past to try and detect and respond aren't really enough anymore, right? You kind of started with basic antivirus. Back in the day, everyone had Norton or McAfee, right? And that was kind of good enough. And then it's kind of changed. Right now, everyone's getting into EDR and MDR and SOC, and you've got players that are using novel things like AI and heuristics in order to detect. But the whole problem with detection is you have to really know what you're looking for in order to be able to detect it, right? You can't detect what you don't know. And a lot of the threats are the unknown, right? It's the 0 days, right? And the game is changing so quickly in today's landscape that we can't rely on detection tools alone. I think of, example comes to mind, in our ThreatLocker demos, we have a script we use to kind of demonstrate how we can steal data from your environment using, PowerShell. And so we've, challenged a lot of customers and say, hey, plug this in, see if your current tools will protect against this. And, we've done this with hundreds of customers, and, pretty much every time it works. And so we had a larger customer. They went to their vendor, someone you've definitely heard of, and they said, hey, why did this get through? So a little bit later, that they added that into what that tool was able to detect, and it blocked it. And so what we did was what any self-respecting IT person does. You go to ChatGPT and you say, hey, here's what we have. Can you modify this just a little bit? Give us a slight change here to do the same thing, but in a different way. And it gave us a Python script. It gave us a batch file. It gave us a C++ encoded executable, right, to then do all basically the same thing. So we sent that back to the customer, and guess what? That their EDR tool didn't detect any of those, right? So with tools like generative AI now, it's so easy. You don't even have to be an expert, right? You can just go in there, say, show it what you have, and it can very easily iterate into something that is no longer detected again, right? And that's really the downside of detection, right? You can only detect what you know, and you can't know everything, right? And a detection tool has to be effective 100% of the time in order for it to work, right? That one time it doesn't work, then now you have an attack, now you have a breach, and they've gotten into your environment. And so, how are we seeing these attacks happening? You've got the traditional malware trajectory where you're using executables or scripts or maybe a zip file that's infected, and that happens. That's not uncommon. And a lot of time on those sort of attacks, that's the thing that your traditional AV EDR tools can often detect. But what we see now is a lot of the initial indicators that a ransomware attack is occurring is they're using tools that IT administrators might use, things that would look very similar to what y'all might be using in your environment, like a IP scanner or remote access tools, things that an EDR tool isn't going to flag as malicious because they're very useful tools, right? And then once they've kind of seen the environment, they use built-in tools like PowerShell command prompt to kind of further that ransomware attack. And once you have access to PowerShell and those other tools, you can kind of do almost anything. So how do we stop this, right? That's where zero trust comes in, right? The term zero trust architecture, it's really a security model that eliminates implicit trust into any one element, right? It's giving your users the bare minimum they need to perform their job, right? So it's changing the thought process of, well, let's not be too invasive. Let's just let them do what they need to do. And then hopefully we can react and respond in time, right? To giving people least privilege so that they only have what they need to do, right? We don't want to interfere with what they're doing, right? Give them just the very least, though. And that's really where ThreatLocker core is about, right? We want to allow what you need and block everything else, right? And when we say block everything else, we mean executables. We mean DLLs, scripts, things, whether you're an admin or not, right? And this is something that we can define in the environment, right? We know what you need to use because it's already on your machines right now, right? Your users are using it, right? So we can define that. We can make a list of the applications that you have, and we can permit those, right? So it's not really that hard to find that out because it already exists in the environment. And so that's what we do. We use what exists now, build out what the list of the applications that you're using to permit that, and then we block everything else, right? Just by default. So and a lot of times what we see is vulnerabilities or features being used by attackers, right? Features could be macros. So it was very common for a while that you want to disable macros in Office documents because it was a kind of a common attack vector. But now it's much more common, I think, that vulnerabilities or zero-day exploits are used. And one of those big ones was Felina, which affected Microsoft Office. So Felina, didn't require you to have macros enabled. It basically just exploited a vulnerability in the Office suite to run malware. And I got a quick little video that kind of demonstrates exactly how that worked. So here we've got a document that had that Felina vulnerability used in it. So user would open it up. It would seem like most any other document, but then it would have an error, right? So errors in Windows, that's obviously not uncommon. So user wouldn't probably think too much of it. But in the background, this is now accessing PowerShell. And then once we get access to PowerShell, there's almost no limit on what we can do, right? You can run ransomware, you can install a remote access tool, you could delete backups, you could steal data, kind of all sorts of things there. And to really dive a little deeper on how this specifically worked, so document files, they're really like a zip file, right? So there's many files as part of a docx or an XLS, right, that are all embedded in there. And basically they embedded a malicious payload in one of those files. And in that case, it essentially called PowerShell, piped in some commands, and that command was used to download malware from the internet. Now, if you're using allow listing, right, that could block the malware from running. But wouldn't we prefer to stop it even before it downloads, right? Or what if they're not downloading malware, they used it to steal your files or your data, or delete everything, or just start encrypting things, right? So it doesn't always have to have a file. That's where those kind of fileless attacks come in. So let's assume that every application is vulnerable, right? And you have so many applications in the environment, so we have to assume that every environment is vulnerable. Every application is going to carry some inherent level of risk with you allowing it to run, whether that's a supply chain attack that could be used. And we've seen that with Kaseya, SolarWinds, 3CX, CCleaner, so many others, right? Where the company itself is compromised, and then that tool is, that software that you've permitted and you've, quote unquote, trusted is used in your environment maliciously. Or it could be, something like PowerShell that's just built in, that's just used in a way that you don't want it. So it's weaponized, right? So there's always some inherent level of risk within applications. So how do we stop that? So at ThreatLocker, we use something called ring fencing. And what we define as ring fencing is basically ThreatLocker's ability to control what permitted applications are able to do, right? It's not enough just to say, here's what can run and we're going to block everything else, because, those applications can get weaponized, right? So we have to apply that idea of zero trust within the application as well. And so limit what access applications have and apply that idea of least privilege there as well. So for something like Office, right, let's not give it access to PowerShell, right? There's no reason, you need to really access PowerShell from Office, or, a number of other powerful system utilities. So let's prevent that crosstalk, right? Let's just block that by default and only allow Office access to the things that it needs. Same with PowerShell itself, right? All of these, built-in utilities within the system can get weaponized and potentially used against you. So we have to put controls in place around those utilities to prevent that, right? PowerShell could be used to connect to a remote malware server. It could be used, in a reverse shell attack. So let's just not give it access to the internet. Now, there are probably going to be some exclusions there, and we can, create those exclusions. But again, the whole idea of zero trust is to deny by default and permit by exclusion, right? So we'll allow the exclusions, and we can make those exceptions. But again, let's just not give it that access to begin with. And the same around your users' files and folders, your data, right? Which is generally going to be the most important part of your IT infrastructure. So I'm sure probably 99% of your end users, there's probably no reason that PowerShell would ever need to access their files, right? So let's, again, allow by exception and, block by default. So let's not give them access to the files and folders unless it's explicitly needed. Then we can create those exceptions, right? And so that's really, again, how ThreatLocker applies that idea of zero trust, not just for what can run, but what the permitted applications can do through what we call ring fencing there. And so what we often see is a lot of companies are really focused on the detection. So here we kind of have we would kind of consider kind of cybersecurity pyramid. It takes detection, controls, the human element. And what we often see is, a lot of companies have, an AV, they got an EDR, a SOC, maybe an MDR, they've got anti-spam, anti-phishing, right? They've got a lot of things that are doing that detection, and they're hoping that, one of those tools is going to detect, the attack before it gets too far, right? And that's kind of what you're relying on. So what we want to do is implement more controls, right? Controls are more cut and dry, right? Firewall. Firewall is kind of the, one of the original, implementations of zero trust, right? If you haven't opened a port in, your firewall's default rule is going to, block by default. And you have other tools like dual factor authentication, right? It's no real gray area there. Either you have the token and you can put it in, or you don't, right? So you don't move forward. And then a lot of the ThreatLocker suite is around those controls, right? So we have what we've talked about so far with application whitelisting, with ring fencing, but we also have elevation control, storage control, and network access control. So adding additional controls and layers in the environment as well there. And then, of course, there's always the human element, which, unfortunately is probably the most vulnerable there, right? Our end users, we can, do security awareness training. We can, try and, teach them not to click on those links and, test them and do things there. But, we know that's never going to be 100%, right? So we obviously want to do that and use tools that leverage that and increase that awareness. But that's never going to be 100%, right? So we can't rely on that fully there. So, we've kind of focused on, ThreatLocker and how we do allow listing, right? Which is, that idea of only allow what you need in applications, right? So permit the ones that you use and then block everything else by default. And then how we've enhanced that with ring fencing, applying that idea of zero trust within the applications themselves. But we've got a few other, pieces of the ThreatLocker suite. So elevation control, which is allowing you to more granularly control admin privileges, right? So instead of using a local admin account, you can elevate just the application that needs it. You can elevate just the part of Windows that needs it, right? So then you're not having to use a local admin account, right? So, and because we run at the kernel level, we're able to do this credentiallessly, so there's no password to lose. So it's a bit more secure. But basically, again, following that idea of least privilege, right? If you only need to elevate one application, then let's only elevate that application and not anything else. And then we have network access control, which is basically leveraging ThreatLocker to control what ports are open in the environment to what machines, and being able to leverage ThreatLocker to authenticate and ensure that unauthorized devices can't see ports that are open. Right. So if we've deployed out ThreatLocker in the environment, we can ensure that non-ThreatLocker machines don't see what ports are open in your environment. So if someone gains access, whether that's through a compromised VPN connection or other ways, they do a network scan, they don't see any ports open because we're ensuring that we've only opened ports to the devices that we manage and secure in the environment. And then we have storage control, which is basically our ability to ensure that your data is only accessed by the applications that need it, right? Not every application needs access to all of your data, so let's not give that access. Along with that, we may want to also lock down other ways that users may remove data, right? Through external hard drives or network shares and controls around there. So those are kind of all the pieces or the major pieces of the ThreatLocker suite. We'd love to give you a demo show how that we can implement this in weeks versus months and years. I think one of the reasons why a lot of businesses haven't moved to a zero trust model or application control or these things is it's often viewed as very difficult, and in the past it kind of has been, right? So allow listing and only allowing what's needed isn't a new concept, right? This has been around for a long time, but often it's been limited to the DoD, to huge corporations that can really put the manpower to it, and often it can take years to really implement some of these tools. And so what ThreatLocker has really done is change that, and so that it's much simpler, right? So we can implement this, like I said, in weeks versus months and years, right? And so that's really where the change has been, bringing this as to something that's, an easy thing to do. And so, we'd love to, show you a full demo of what we can do, maybe do a proof of concept, really let you get your hands on it. Because, while we can tell you all these things, it really is, proof in the pudding, as they say. So, put it into your environment, let it see how it would work. And so you can really see that, it is a much simpler thing to implement than you might think. So thanks, guys. I know we have potentially some questions, so we have a Q&A available.
Yeah, when Sam, we're going to take just I'll run right into that. So give me a second, and we will get right to that. But I appreciate you sharing, my friend. Thank you very much. And let me share one last thing here with our audience. And but that was most excellent, my friend. Thank you very much. And you really clarified the impetus behind the Zero Trust at DoD and the architecture and roadmap, and then appreciate you dialing it into practical ways to kind of move forward by focusing on the endpoint, because clearly we've discovered in our journey with Zero Trust with our customer base that it's a fantastic place to get controls in place that matter, controls in place that make a difference, and do it in a very time-sensitive fashion, if you will. Before we get to Q&A, I do want to just take just a second and provide you a snapshot level, if you will, of our security service offerings. And so this is what we call kind of the 5S, the Ark security shield, right? And it to get my button to push, there we go. It is to provide security and to provide layers across the endpoints, the applications, the network, the perimeter, email and cloud. And the way that we look at it and what we do for our customers is this emphasis. First, certainly we talked about, and Sam's talked about quite a bit with controls, and with the default deny and other things like MFA, you can make a significant difference in your infrastructure. The next thing is detection and protection. So there are a lot of alternative tools here, but as the world continues to advance towards tools like XDR, that's where we've invested ourselves and helping our customer. Those tools include a 24/7 SOC, and that kind of 1-2 punch allows you to get a lot of bang for your collective dollar, because so many breaches, so many hacking attempts start with a phishing attempt. Providing human awareness, providing awareness training for your people is a really critical thing. The last thing, and what we've kind of discovered over the last several years, is that risk is a hard thing to pin down. Risk can be pretty fuzzy. And as a consequence, when you have a hard time defining your risk or getting your arms around it, you can spend money on things that you don't want to spend. So that's been something that we've really spent a lot of time with in the last couple of years with our customers. And we kind of, the analogy that we look at kind of is how do you make sure you're not spending $1,000 on a lock to protect your $65 bike, right? And so how do you make sure that spend is really targeted at where your risks are and where your threats are, with those both being, different things. So I won't go through this. We've been blessed as a company. We're blessed to be part of Ark. Those of you that know us as 5S, you will love Ark. You will love the leadership team from Ark. Several of you have already had a chance to meet the team, and I know you would agree with it. We could not be more delighted to be part of Ark. They bring to bear the same things that we do. We've put this little brag sheet up here only because, if you're new to working with us, you might not know the type of company we are, and you might not know that we invest in making sure that we've got the right securities in place. We've been growing. We're one of the bigger MSPs in the country, and the one that we're most proud of is that being one of Inc.'s best places to work. So leave it at that, and going to march on to Q&A. And I'll leave this slide up there, but the one thing that I did want to wrap up is that one of our nation's most vaunted institutions, right? The United States Department of Defense, the one that keeps us safe, has doubled down on Zero Trust, right? And it keeps them ahead of nation states. It keeps them ahead of these zero-day threats. That's the big source. That's the number one source of breaches these days, right? And it's the philosophy that assumes you're breached and that denies by default, and it doesn't trust squat, right? And you don't have to be 4 million employees to start. Like we said, 40, 400, or 4,000. And if you focus on the endpoint, you can make a difference in your security posture, and not in 5 years, but in 5 weeks and oftentimes less. You can make a significant difference by putting in place these controls and this philosophy. And you don't have to be at scale to accomplish that. So we really encourage you, please reach out to your rep or these generic handles here. And we would love to schedule a personal demonstration. If you like it from there, we will take it to letting you give it a run and trial it yourself, see how easy it is to implement. They've broken the paradigm on ease of implementing and maintaining zero trust. So with that said, I know there are I'm going to keep that screen up there in case you feel compelled to write down some of those names. Let me get to the questions. We do have a handful of questions out there, and one of the things that I thought was particularly germane is, can you explain the process, Sam, of implementing ThreatLocker within an organization's existing security infrastructure? And that was one
Certainly, yeah. So ThreatLocker, we're agent based, right? So it's basically just deploying out our agent. It'll start in what we call our learning mode, right? So first thing we have to do is figure out, what are all the applications you're using, right? Define that list of what is needed, right? And then we'll work with you to then pare down, because often what we find is you find all the things that are out there, and you may be surprised at what some of your end users have added, and the applications are on their machine. So we can kind of pare that down, audit it, and then we would move to that secure and enforcement mode. So it's, generally, average time on that is around, 3 to 4 weeks of total implementation time. That can vary, based on the organization, but it's kind of average implementation time.
Okay. So question number 2, how does ThreatLocker work with VPN solutions, reducing ACL complexity of blocking internal resources?
Yeah, so that would be more on ThreatLocker's network control side. So a VPN is great, right? It's creating a tunnel, a tunnel there into your network. But if a VPN is compromised in some way, then they have access to the network. So ThreatLocker can allow you to authenticate the machine in a second way to ensure that it doesn't matter if they have the right credentials. It has to be the right machine, the one that you manage and control, that's able to connect in. And so that is all done, by leveraging the ThreatLocker agents. You don't have to really use, ACLs in that manner.
Okay. Well, here's one that I'll throw at you. And does the capability extend to websites, i.e. block a website?
So we're not really like a web filter in that, you want to block, torrent sites or something like that, right? We're more, if you go to a website and someone clicks on the wrong thing, we're going to prevent that from being able to run. So we do have, through ring fencing, we could, do some blocking of websites, but that's not really the core focus of what ThreatLocker does.
Okay, yeah. And I think that's good for people to know that, what it does do and doesn't do. We don't want to prescribe this for a problem it doesn't solve, right?
Right.
Does ThreatLocker work well with other endpoint security solutions like EDR, EDR, excuse me?
So yes, certainly. So probably in most cases, we're working alongside any of the popular named EDRs, and it's not an issue at all.
Okay, good. Then how about, this is an important question because it really goes to the maintenance and feeding the beast, so to speak. How does ThreatLocker handle software updates and patches while maintaining these application allow listing policies?
Right, yeah. So I think that's a real important question, and one that is one of the big ways that ThreatLocker has really changed the idea of application whitelisting. So we have what we call built-in policies, and we're now at over 3,500 of them. And what that is we are managing the policies for common applications for you, right? So when Windows updates, come out, Patch Tuesday occurs, you don't have to worry about permitting all those new items because ThreatLocker is already managing that for you. So ThreatLocker is software as a service, so it's a managed solution in that when any of these common applications, your web browsers, your the security tools that you use get updates, we're constantly updating those policies to ensure that those don't get blocked, right? So that's really one of the key ways that we reduce the complexity and reduce the time and maintenance needed to implement and maintain the solution.
Right. Hey, listen, we are at the end of our allotted time, and everybody has hung in there. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you. You see the contact information. You know, only you can act on this, right? But this is the chance to jump in that up-armored Humvee for yourself, right? And for your organization and make a difference. You can change your security posture significantly in a very short period of time. And we have some really neat case studies and stories that we can tell from, you know, people in our customer range up and down the East Coast. So thank you all. That is it. And please reach out. Please take a next step. We would be delighted to let you give this a trial. Thank you.